This is the On Humans podcast, a show which makes new research about humanity more accessible to everyone and more meaningful to the big questions about who we are. I'm your host, Ilari Mäkelä, and if you listened to my previous episode, you know that I'm just back from California, where I was attending a symposium at the Salk Institute on what combining archaeology and genetics can tell us about human origins. Now, it's one of the most exciting fields currently, I think, in any form of study of humanity. We are living through one of the most incredible scientific revolutions of my lifetime, and being able to be at that symposium, actually be with people who find ways to get DNA from these ancient remains, analyze it, and decode human story by doing it. It was a very exciting experience, and therefore I'm very happy that I was able to, during breaks, during dinner time, etc., get 3 scholars there to interview for a short episode to share a little peek behind the curtains of this extremely interesting development in the study of human origins, and as you will see, in the study of human journey more generally. So it's a really fascinating field. If you are new to it, I hope that I can share some of the fascination with you. If you are not new to it, even work with it, don't worry, you're almost guaranteed to find something new in these 3 short episodes. So this first one is about Neanderthals. My guest is David Gokhman from Weizmann Institute of Science. And I don't think this needs much of an intro, but just to say briefly, I do want to note the irony. If you did listen to the previous episode, which was a solo one, you know that I am pretty optimistic about our capacity to tell a pretty accurate story about the origins of humankind, but that there is one aspect of it which I was very pessimistic about, and that's the origins of language. Is it just something that a big-brained human would obviously do? You know, what else? To shut up? Or is language something very special? Something perhaps restricted to us, Homo sapiens, modern humans. Maybe even the secret to our success. Well, I don't know, but the next day I heard David Gokhman discuss his research on the origins of language, which is mind-blowing in its methods. We don't really go into the methods that much. If you're a geek, you should definitely check them out. But it's incredible what his team is able to do, and I'm very happy that he can share some of it with you today, including some unpublished research coming out soon. If you enjoy this and you want to stay tuned, do subscribe to On Humans, both here and at Substack, onhumans.substack.com. And if you want to show some support, the easiest way to do it is to share this with someone who you think might like it, and give the show 5 stars if you think that I deserve it. Finally, I want to say a warm thank you, as always, to all the wonderful people who support this work at patreon.com/onhumans. Thanks for keeping me going. So without further ado, I bring you David Gokhman. Professor David Gokhman, welcome to On Humans.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
How did you get interested in Neanderthals?
So I think I was always interested by the idea that what we see today in the animal kingdom is just a tiny fraction of what once existed, like mammoths, whales, reptiles, dinosaurs, a lot of things that were here, were successful, but disappeared. And then one day I learned that there is actually the same thing for humans, and there were different versions of humans that existed, coexisted with us, but for some reason disappeared. So when I learned about that, I was fascinated by the fact that we're just one of many versions that could make humans.
What would be then the ways for someone who wants to study this kind of Middle Earth, where you have all these different forms of humans? Let's start from the very, very basics. What are the ways we can start asking the question how similar or how different we are to them?
So for over 100 years, the only way to do that was archaeology and paleontology, meaning taking remains that these people left on Earth. They could be bones, they could be stone tools, paintings, and infer from them how these people behaved, looked, thought. And that was the main way in which we learned about these lineages. We learned about the morphology. For example, Neanderthals were shorter than us, more robust than us, probably more muscular than us. They had the bigger rib cages, perhaps bigger guts. They were probably more adapted to the cold climates of Europe. A lot of people think that they have been these stupid cavemen, but they probably weren't. They had brains just as big as ours. And we learned that they are very similar to us. We interacted with them, actually interbred with them, but for some reason they disappeared. And more recently, we also have genetics.
Genetics is where it gets very interesting. Let's say a little bit of a cliffhanger there. First look at the kind of classic findings. let me give you my naive impression and you can say what you think about it. So my naive impression is that we have moved from a view where they were very, very different from us, culture, cave paintings. These things are purely for modern humans, Homo sapiens. They did nothing of that. And recently there's been a push towards actually the gap is much smaller than we used to think, though there is still a bit of a gap. There is probably more cultural artifacts in the typical sapiens remains than in the Neanderthals. First of all, what do you think of that? Is that a kind of accurate summary of where we are?
I think it is. It's unclear how big the gap is and whether there are also gaps in the other direction where they were superior to us. I think our fault is that we want to feel superior. We want to feel more advanced. We want to feel like modern humans are the epitome of human evolution, but we don't know if that's true. And what is epitome of human evolution? We do know that they were very successful. They survived for over 500,000 years in places that modern humans weren't able to survive, like Europe.
And by the way, 500,000 years, it's longer than we have been around.
Yeah. And they spread all the way from Spain to Siberia. They had technology, they had complex social interactions. So it's really unclear how big the gap is and how subjective we are in determining how big the gap is.
Well, let's use that flipping the angle and take seriously the possibility that there are some things where perhaps we are better, but some things where they are better. They have the same size brain as we do. However, they're differently shaped. Now, I know that this is a very controversial area. How much can we infer from brain shape? Anything about the shape of the mind, so to speak. If we speculate a little and we look at where the Neanderthal brain differs from ours, and we would try to think of some things where they possibly might have had more brain power than us. If you're happy to go along with that exercise, let's run through the speculation.
It is very speculative, but we can play with some ideas there. So we can learn about the structure of the brain from the endocast that it leaves on the skull. And what we see from that is, for example, that Neanderthals had a bigger occipital lobe.
So the very back of the brain.
Yeah, which processes visual signs. So again, size does not mean function, but there is a rough correlation between the two. So if I would have guessed what could be different in Neanderthals, I would go for this structure that was different, and perhaps they were better at processing these visual signs, integrating visual signs with other senses. But we really don't know. It's just me playing with my imagination, thinking about this weird structure that is different in Neanderthals and might have been actually better in some aspects.
And I think something where a lot of people's naive guesses would be is that, well, then when we were probably better, it was not the back of the brain, but the front of the brain. So we have all this, clever thinking, cognitive self-awareness, who knows, which lives in the front in typical caricatures of the brain. Am I right that that's actually not the case, that in the front we don't find that many differences?
We don't find many differences, and more so, even our understanding of which parts of the brain are in charge of which functions keeps evolving all the time. Just one example is the cerebellum. That's actually the most divergent region morphologically between archaic humans and modern humans.
And the cerebellum is this somewhat mysterious structure at the back of the brain, but under the occipital lobe that you mentioned earlier. In Finnish, actually, we have the word for cerebellum is the little brain.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's quite cute. So thinking of the big brain, the back is bigger in Neanderthals. This cerebellum, the little brain, is at least
differently shaped.
Differently shaped. Okay, okay. But let's go with that. So there we have definitely some differences. In the front, we don't have that many differences. Mm-hmm. Do you think we can say anything about, even in the speculative realm, can we say anything about what that difference in the cerebellum in this very mysterious bit would perhaps mean?
So it is one of the least understood parts of the brain. In the past, we thought we understand it quite well. We thought cerebellum is motor control. That's what it does.
So like dancing or fine cue.
Yeah, but today we realize it's involved in a lot of functions. It's actually in very complex functions like language. It plays a key role in language. It plays a key role in rhythm. And we keep discovering new things about the things that the cerebellum does. So that would be one of the parts of the brain that I would be least confident speculating about.
Okay. The front, not so many differences in the cerebellum. Yes, differences in the occipital back area. Differences in the sense that it's bigger in the Neanderthals. Am I right that the one bit that is clearly bigger in us is the so-called parietal lobe, which is something quite very much at the very top of the head. Am I right?
Top and sides.
So what does that tell us, if anything?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not familiar enough with the parietal bone.
Well, I'm not surprised because I'm in nonsense expert, but my undergrad was in half at the psychology department.
Mhm.
And I remember when I was studying the kind of foundations of neuroscience, parietal, this was the thing that always confused me. I was like, what is this place doing?
Yeah.
There really doesn't seem to be a very unified view.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's move to the genetics.
Mhm.
How can the remarkable scientific revolution of the past 20 or so years, when we have been able to actually extract DNA from these early human remains and we've been able to analyze it, Svante Pääbo won the Nobel Prize actually for this work, the very first Nobel Prize ever to study human origins, a remarkable development. What has that given us? That has given us the knowledge that there was interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, okay. But in terms of what were they like and what are we like, what, if anything, can the genetics tell?
So it changed everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals. It changed even the definition of a species. We thought most people would have agreed 30 years ago that these were probably separate species. We see that they kept interbreeding in different parts of the world, in different directions. It was not an uncommon situation. So the barrier between the two lineages was not as strong as we thought before.
In terms of the term species, I just want to mention that I have noticed increasingly my guests wanting to say modern humans rather than Homo sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this is one of the reasons Homo sapiens is a Latinized traditional species name. And to the extent that actually we were interbreeding, and the traditional view of a species is, okay, you have a species when you can interbreed with the other species.
Exactly.
It seems that we might not really marry to that signification. Hence, I've seen it especially amongst the ancient DNA experts is that they tend to avoid these Latin names.
Right. And instead use these vague terms like lineage, group. We don't use species to talk about Neanderthals versus modern humans. It's just, we don't know if these were different species. Probably not.
And we don't even really know what the species term means, which some would add, but let's leave that huge debate aside. We leave it to the philosophers of biology, and let's focus on these two different lineages. Okay, so the gap has been closing, not fully. It's clear that they are different. They are not within the variation of, for example, modern humans. They are significantly more different than any two groups of humans alive today are to us, but they are not that far. Can we say something more?
Yeah, so if we look at our genomes, we actually have an almost identical set of genes. So the building blocks of our genome are almost identical between modern humans, Neanderthals, and also another sister group called Denisovans. Where evolution plays with these things is to what extent these building blocks are expressed, in which tissue, when, where, in which developmental stage. That's the playground of evolution. So you take the same building blocks, but you use one more, or more extensively, or more often, or to a bigger extent.
And so in a sense, it's like having the same books in your library, but varies is the curriculum of when you're going to open this book and when that book.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to think about it as an orchestra. You can have the same instruments, but you can have an entirely different symphony if you use different tools at different times, at different notes. And that's it. You have the same building blocks, but you can use them in such different ways that you can create entirely different species out of the same genome. And this is what we study. So we compare not what genes exist in modern humans versus Neanderthals, but how we use them differently. Which ones were more active in modern humans? Which ones were more active in Neanderthals? When were these differences expressed? And this teaches us a lot about these differences in the morphology, brain function, and other aspects of our biology that we can learn from that, because this is where evolution plays with our genomes.
What have you found?
So we keep seeing in different analyses that we do that the organ that seems to have the most extreme changes in how we operate our genes are genes that affect our vocal tract, meaning that our voice box, larynx that produces our voice, our pharynx, which is our mouth region. These were genes or organs that probably went through extensive and rapid evolution in modern humans, but not so in archaic humans. We don't see the same trend in Neanderthals and Denisovans.
And so did I understand that right? It's not just that we are different in terms of the vocal tract, but also that there was more rapid change in the lineage leading to us.
Yes, yes. In modern humans, we see rapid changes in the vocal tract. In Neanderthals and Denisovans, we see some changes, but they do not differ from changes in other parts of the body.
Now, that's quite interesting. Before I'm going to ask the $1,000,000 question, let me just ask, does this relate in anyhow to at some point, a popular image I saw online about Neanderthals having very high-pitched voices?
So this high pitch is an attempt to infer about Neanderthal vocalization from the morphology of their mouth.
Okay, so the classic method, not the genetic method.
Exactly. But we focus on the genetics. On one hand, they give us more information about the specific functions and differences. On the other hand, this is still a huge mystery because these are genes that we don't have good systems to study. We cannot do any analyses or experiments in humans on their vocal tract and changing genes to see how they affect the vocal tract. We cannot study this in vitro, meaning in a plate in a lab. We need the entire organ. So although we see this rapid, extensive evolution of the vocal tract, we're not really sure how it affected, if it affected our voice. And this is something we're still trying to figure out. This is the big mystery of what we see in our data.
Well, I guess it's very, like you said, we don't really understand everything that's going on here. However, for people who would say that that the gap has basically narrowed down out of existence, this probably shows that, well, no, there are some interesting differences. If you want to understand why, for example, we are here and they are not, this might be one of the clues. It is highly suggestive of language being part of the puzzle. How far should we take that line of speculation? I mean, one extreme would be to say that the Neanderthals, they did not speak and we speak. That's a difference. Another one would be to say that no, that probably we can infer nothing about language because it is all such an early stage research. Where do you land on the interpretation of this super interesting finding that one of the main things that separates our lineage is this rapid development in the gene expression of things that build up our voice box and other parts of what I'm doing right now, speaking to you?
I think it suggests that the vocal tract have been crucial and important and under selection in our evolution. And that says a lot. It means that it was key to making us modern humans and perhaps wasn't that central in the evolution of archaic humans. That doesn't mean that they didn't have a language. And I would guess that they definitely had complex ways of communicating for sure. We see it even in chimpanzees. And we learn more and more every year about the different ways and complex ways in which chimpanzees communicate. We know that Neanderthals lived in groups that were complex. They interacted with themselves, with other groups, with other lineages. So there was something that allowed them to communicate in different ways and pass technology and things like that. I'm sure they had ways of doing it. Was it language as we know it? I'm sure it was different to some extent, but I definitely don't know where it falls on the spectrum. I do know that when we take some of our genes, we just have a paper going to be published where we take one of the genes that changed the most in modern humans. We overexpress it in mice, meaning we recapitulate human evolution in a mouse for this gene. We see that these mice communicate more. Their intonation is more frequent and in a higher frequency, in different frequency.
And this would be a gene that is not just particularly human compared to a chimpanzee, but specifically modern human compared to, for example,
yes.
Neanderthal.
It's a gene that it looks like became more active in modern humans. When we recapitulate this in mice, we see differences to the vocalization in many ways. So I think these differences that we see did have an effect on vocalization. But vocalization is not language. And this is where the gap is. The brain plays the most central role in our language. And for the brain, we don't know almost anything about how language is encoded in modern humans, let alone in archaic humans. And that, I think, is a very exciting way in which this field is going to evolve in the next few years.
What do you think we should keep our eyes on in terms of science news? Where could we place our bets on the next big finding in this line of research?
So I would say, first of all, the archaic humans, the archaic genomes we have today completely changed the way we think about our relatives, but these are just a few of our relatives. So I would love to see more genomes from other close relatives, more distant relatives that we have zero information on. And they would actually give us a better answer of what it is to be human, because they're closer to the ancestor, to the first human. They're more diverse, so they would give us the spectrum and the origins of humans in a way that we didn't have access to before.
My final question to our guests is, how has all your work shaped your outlook on humanity?
To me, the most inspiring thing is to think of how these differences between human lineages contributed to our own evolution. So we intermixed with Neanderthals. We got genes from them, versions of genes that actually were adaptive to our evolution, that shaped our evolution. We contributed genes to them that shaped their evolution. This exchange, I think, is the most exciting aspect of this coexistence with other versions of humans.
David Gokhman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was it for today. Thanks for sticking with us until the very end. And stay tuned for the next episode in this mini-series coming out on Monday, which is going to take us quite literally beyond race, looking at the real but so surprising ways that geneticists have constructed the human family tree. You are guaranteed a big surprise. But while waiting for that, do subscribe to Unhumans if you haven't done so yet, and do consider making a gesture of support, sharing, rating, or even joining patreon.com/unhumans. Until next time, take care.